Luckily, we've only got 1 minute. Give me a minute. 1 minute. Give me a minute. 1 minute. Give me a minute. There we go. So I had to check. Luckily, after this book, there's only 3 left. So yeah. I can't sit where I used to sit because this bit of my neck really hurts when I sit like that. So that's next for the next 4 books. Saying that, I might not do all 4. I might just do this one because I'm getting tired. And I'm getting hungry. So I might just look at the last one. I'll do the final 3 tomorrow. Okay. So this one's called East End Angels. I think this is be more I'll be able to read. It's too complicated. Okay. Chapter 1. London, August 1940. Stella Franklin brought the car to a small halt. Yeah. Smooth halt, and risked a quick glance at the pail of water standing on the floor beside the examiner's seat. She was relieved to see that although the surface was rocking slightly, none of the water had sloped out and was still as full as when they set off. "If you'd like to switch off the engine, Miss Franklin. We don't want to waste a drop of precious petrol, do we?" The examiner spoke without looking at her as he started to write on the form attached to his clipboard. Stella did as she was told, and the sound of the engine died away. The quiet that replaced it seemed all the more pronounced as she waited for the verdict. Had she passed or not? She was desperate to know, and had to clamp her mouth shut to stop herself from blurting out the question. She must be patient and wait, listening to the sound of the examiner's pen nib scratching against the paper, while her heart throbbed so fast and hard inside her chest that it felt like it was trying to batter its way out. "So, Miss Franklin," the examiner finally said, snapping the lid back on its pen and tucking its safety into the inside pocket of his tweed jacket, "you wish to be an ambulance driver?" She nodded. "Yes, I do." Was he about to fail her? She tried so hard, being extra careful changing gear, slowing down smoothly, making sure the car made no sudden jerking movements to spill any of the precious water, which was supposed to test the gentleness of the driver, replacing how an injured patient would be jolted around. "And since you've completed all your other training, first aid and anti-gas precautions and such?" The examiner paused and then smiled at her. "Well, I'm pleased to say that you are now past your driving test." "I've passed!" Stella wanted to throw her arms around him in delight, but managed to rein herself in. "Indeed you have. You drove extremely well. Of course you'll need further practice once you've been assigned to your station to familiarize yourself with driving ambulances, but I've no doubt you'll make a fine driver." Stella beamed at him. "Thank you very much." The examiner opened the car door and eased himself out, then picked up a pail of water, taking care not to spill any. "Good luck to you, Miss Franklin. If Hitler turns his sights on London, we'll need drivers like you." Stella sat still for a moment and watched him walk away, letting the knowledge that she'd done it sink in. The delight it gave her fizzing and coursing through her body, warming her to her very core. Not many girls from Stepney ever got the chance to learn to drive, and there'd been plenty who'd questioned the sanity of what she was doing when she already had a steady job at the garment factory with regular money and hours, and where she knew everyone and they knew her. But spending the war sewing uniforms was for Stella. So she'd grabbed the opportunity to do something beyond the boundaries of the life that had been mapped out for her. She'd often seen the woman from the London Auxiliary Ambulance Service driving around and had admired their daring, and now she looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror and smiled, her blue eyes sparkling with happiness. She was going to be one of them. Auxiliary Ambulance Station 75 was a short ribbons flight away from the Tower of London. Tucked away in flat-topped news garages opposite of his crescent of grand trenched houses, ambulances were now kept where luxurious cars once parked, and the chauffeurs and their families had long since moved out of the flats above the garages to make way for the ambulance crews. Walking through the wide arched passageway leaning into the crescent, Stella saw that the garage doors were flung wide open, with ambulances and cars lined up inside ready for action, and her heart skipped with happiness as she thought that she had finally about to start the job that she had dreamed of for months. She took a deep breath to try and still the fluttering nerves in her stomach and walked towards the garages, hoping that she'd find someone there who could direct her to the station officer to whom she'd been told to report. As she passed the bonnet of the nearest grey-painted ambulance, a jet of icy cold water hit her sparingly in the stomach, making her gasp with shock. "Got you!" a plumpy voice shouted as a tall woman with honey blonde hair and pillar box red lipstick sprang out from where she had been hiding around the side of the ambulance. The hose of a stirrup pump grasped firmly in her hands. At the sight of Stella standing there, dripping, the front of her once neat best blouse and shirt soaked through, with a darkened patch spreading by the moment, the woman's face blanched white and her grey and her grey eyes opened wide with horror. "Oh my goodness, I'm so terribly sorry. I thought you were Sparky." She dropped the hose and hurried towards Stella, examining the wet patch, which was seeping and dripping downwards, its icy cold fingers chilling Stella's skin. "Are you all right?" Stella nodded, momentarily lost for words. She'd often dreamed about her first day as an ambulance driver, but she had never imagined it would be like this. "You must be the new girl," Station Officer Steele said. "You were starting sometime today. And look what I've done to you. A fine welcome I've given you. I really am most terribly sorry." The woman held out her hand and smiled warmly. "I'm Winnie." Stella shook the offered hand. "Stella Franklin. I'm pleased to meet you, even if I have soaked you to the skin," Winnie said. "What shall we call you, then?" She paused for a moment, her head tilted to one side. "I know. How about Frankie? What do you think?" "But," Stella began. "I should explain. No one goes by their first names here. You're either known by your surname or a nickname. My real name's Margaret Churchill, which has earned me the name Winnie, like dear old Winston. I much prefer Winnie to Margaret. It's so much less stuffy." She studied Stella's face. "You know, I think Frankie sounds rather lovely, and it suits you. It's a friendly sort of name, don't you think?" Stella considered the idea for a moment. "A new name for a new job," she smiled back at Winnie. "Yes, I like it. Frankie it is." "Splendid. Come on then, Frankie. Let me help you get cleaned up and dried off. Winnie stopped talking as the sound of loud, cheerful whistling drifted towards them. They both turned round and saw a man walking in front the arched passageway with a newspaper tucked under his arm. "Oh no, that really is Sparky. Come on, quick. If he sees what I've done to you, I'll never live it down." Winnie linked her arm through Frankie's and hurried her towards a door at the side of the garages where a flight of stairs led to the upper floor. "This way. All the staff rooms are up here." "Who's Sparky?" Frankie asked, following Winnie up the stairs. "My nemesis," Winnie laughed. He's a driver, and good fun, really. I was only trying to get him back for soaking me with the stirrup pump last week. Tell me if you're going to do it again so I can keep out of the way, Frankie says. It's quite a shock when you ain't expecting it. Winnie put her hand on Frankie's arm. I'm sorry, truly I am. But I can see you're a jolly good sport, and I hope you wouldn't hold it against me. Of course not, Frankie smiled. It wasn't the best start to a job here, but Winnie was so generally sorry that she'd already forgiven her. Can you show me where to find the station officer? I was told to report to her. Yes, of course, but we need to get you changed into some dry clothes first. In here. Winnie opened the door and ushered Frankie inside, quickly following her and closing the door behind them. Our station officer doesn't always see the funny side of us playing around with stirrup pumps, she said in a hushed tone. So if you don't mind, it's best you don't say anything about what happened to you. Don't worry, I won't. Thank you. Winnie smiled and squeezed Frankie's arm. Right, so this delightful room is the ladies' changing room. If you wait here a moment, I'll go find Bella. She's terribly organized and is bound to have some spare clothes that you can borrow while yours dry out. Let, Left on her own, Frankie looked around the room. Hanging on pegs on the wall were a number of the familiar black steel helmets with the letter A painted in way on the front. She couldn't resist taking one down and trying it on in front of the mirror to see how it looked, looping the strap around her chin so it sat securely in on her unburnt hair, urban hair, which she secured out of the way in a knot at the nape of her neck. Staring at her reflection, turning this way and that, she thought she almost looked the part. The sound of the door opening made her jump, and she spun round as Winnie walked in, followed by a shorter woman with dark, curly hair who was carrying a pile of folded clothes in her arms. Frankie's cheeks grew warm, and she hastily removed the steel helmet and replaced it on its peg. I hope you don't mind. I couldn't resist trying one on. Not at all, Winnie laughed. You'll be wearing one for real soon enough. This is Bella. She's got a spare pair of dungarees and a blouse that you can borrow. I'm Stella Frankie. Stella held out her hand. Bella shook it firmly, her lively brown eyes warm and welcoming. Peggy Blount, otherwise known as Bella. I'm sorry you got caught up in one of Winnie's daft pranks on your first day. Here, we're not all as childish as she is. She handed Frankie the pile of clothes. There should st- these should do to your own clothes dry. Thank you. I appreciate you helping me out. You're welcome. Bella smiled at her, her cheeks dripping prettily. Then turned to Winnie. You really want to watch yourself, Winnie, or you're going to get yourself in big trouble with the boss one of these days. It could have been Station Officer Steele walking out there. Winnie clasped her face to her hands. I know. I'm most awfully sorry about soaking Frankie. I wouldn't dream of doing that to her on purpose. Or to you, Bella. I just wanted to get Sparky back for giving me such a horrid drenching last week. And no doubt you will, Bella grinned. Only next time you try, please warn us first so we can keep well out of the way. Station Officer Steele reminded Frankie of a head headmistress. She spoke in a firm, no-nonsense manner, and her screwed brown eyes behind her owlish, horn-trimmed spectacles had a way of feel as if she knew everything about you. Frankie understood exactly why Winnie hadn't wanted her boss to know that she soaked her with the syrup pump. You'll need to spend a week working as an attendant before we can send you out as a driver. It'll give you a chance to learn how we do things and become familiar with the routines, Station Officer Steele explained. I'm going to put you with Winnie to start with. I'm sure she'll look after you and show you the ropes. Providing, of course, that she doesn't continue to use stirrup pumps or anything other than their intended purpose. She paused, her arched eyebrows slightly raised as she looked at Winnie, who had a tinge of pink creeping across her creamy face, creamy, creamy skin. Huh. There is very little that goes on here that I don't know about, Miss Churchill, so let's just stick to the rules, shall we? It's best for everyone's sakes. There may well come a time when stirrup pumps are all that stands between us and the station burning down, and should that time arrive, we'll need them in perfect working order and not damaged from any misuse. I hope we're in agreement there. Yes, of course, Station Officer Steele, Winnie said. I'm sorry. Jolly good, Station Officer Steele nodded and turned her attention back to Frankie. Driving an ambulance is rather different to a car, and you'll need to get used to handling them before we let you loose on any patients. I'll ask Sparky to take you out on driving practice this week. The more experience you get, the better. Bella appeared in the office doorway with another bundle of clothes in her arms. Here's your uniform, Frankie, such as it is. One regulation coat, one cap with uphill ear flaps, and a steel helmet, she says, handing them over. Any chance of us ever getting a proper uniform like the auxiliary fire service? Not at the moment, Station Officer Steele replied, though it would be jolly useful so we wouldn't have to wear our own clothes. Now, Bella, well, Frankie's working with Winnie. I'm going to put you with a new driver who's been transferred to us from another station this week. She's picked up a piece of paper from one of the next piles on her desk and glanced at it. Oh, William McCartney is an excellent driver by all accounts. Do your best to help him settle in, won't you? Bella nodded. Yes, of course. Who'll be Frankie's attendant when she becomes a driver? Winnie asked. I'll make the decision when the time comes, Station Officer Steele said. In the meantime, the ringing of the telephone interrupted her, and she immediately picked it up. Yes, yes, she grabbed a pen and paper and started writing rapidly. Frankie looked over at Winnie, who mouthed back, It's a call out. Replacing the receiver, Station Officer Steele turned to them. This one's for you, Winnie, Frankie. You can go with her. You may as well start getting some experience right away. You find out where we're going and I'll meet you at the ambulance, Winnie instructed Frankie before rushing out of the door. A heady surge of panic, later of adrenaline, raced through Frankie. She hadn't experienced to go out so soon. Take this, Station Officer Steele handed her the slip of paper she'd written on. It's the address of the incident. Off you go then, and good luck. Come on, Bella, grabbed Frankie's arms and pulled her out of the door. The driver always goes off first and starts the engine. It's the attendant's job to find out where the incident is and then get down to the ambulance as quick as they can, she explained over her shoulder as they ran down the stairs. Everything in the ambulance is already all prepared and ready to go. Outside, Winnie was waiting with the engine running and the passenger door wide open. Where are we going? She asked as Frankie climbed inside, still clinging to the bits of uniform that Bella had given her. Good luck, Bella said, shutting the passenger door for her. Frankie glanced at the neat counterplate handwriting on the slip of paper. 24 Carlisle Street. Do you know where that is? Of course, Winnie put the ambulance into gear and they were off. Frankie looked back at Bella, who waved at her. She smiled and waved back, trying hard to quell the nerves that were knocking tightly around her stomach. This was what she'd dreamed of doing for months, and now that it was happening for real, it was potent mixture of anxiety and excitement. Winnie drove through the high arched passageway, linking the terraced houses and the garages, and out onto the road, where she turned left, making the ambulance sway slightly. She glanced at Frankie. Are you all right? Yes, I'm fine, just a bit surprised. I didn't expect to go out on a call quite so soon. We never know when it's going to happen or where we're going to be sent. It's all part of the excitement, or the worry. However one looks at it, keeps us on our toes. She glanced at Frankie again and smiled. Don't worry, you'll soon get used to it. I absolutely love it. I'd rather be doing this than any other sort of war work. The idea of being in the wharf or the acts and having constant orders barked at me, being bossed around every moment of the day, having to march up and down, yes, sirring, and no, sirring, it would drive me up crazy. She laughed. Though I suspect they wouldn't be very happy with me either. It's really not my sort of thing at all. It would remind me too much of school. Oh, I liked school, Funky said. You wouldn't have liked mine. It felt like a prison to me after India. There were so many rules and things that had to be done in certain ways. Uncomfortable uniforms, horrible food. Winnie backed gently as they approached a junction and, checking it was clear, turned right. Why were you in India? I was born there. I didn't set foot in England until I was 11 years old, when my parents decided it was high time I was educated like an English young lady. Winnie sighed. So they sent me here to be educated like my older brothers before me. I hated boarding school. I suppose at least you got to go back to India in the holidays. Good gracious, no, my parents didn't allow that, she supposed. I've never been back to India since, and I still miss it terribly. I wish I could go back to see my darling Anya again. Anya? My nursemaid, Santa. She looked after my brothers and me from the time we were born. She was like a mother to us. Leaving her was awful. You must have missed your parents too. Winnie shook her head. No, not really. We only used to see them once a day anyway. After I came here to school, I didn't see them for 5 years. Not until they left India and came home to live. Frankie stared at Winnie, shocked at what the other girl had told her. Winnie's upbringing was so different from anything that she'd ever heard of. Where Frankie came from, mothers looked after their own children and would never send them away for years on end, even if they could afford it. So, I, so you'd to stay at school all the time then, even in the holidays? Thankfully, no, when he laughed. That would have been the end of me. My salvation came in the form of my godmother, darling Connie. My brothers and I stayed with her in London every holiday. I live with her now, in fact. She slowed the ambulance down and turned into a side street. This is Carlisle Street. She came to a halt near where a policeman was waiting for them, parking close to the pavement and turning off the engine. What have you got for us? She asked, leaning out of the open window. A dead body, I'm afraid. The young man fell out of that window onto the railings. The policeman pointed up at a third. Didn't stand a chance. He hadn't moved the body, though. It burst away. He cleared his throat. It's not a pretty sight, so we've covered him up with our best, covered up as best we can. He nodded to where another policeman stood guarded beside a blanket-shrouded form on the iron railings in front of the house. Waiter, we'll get a stretcher out and we'll be with you in a moment. When he turned to Frankie, there's nothing to get to the there's nothing anyone can do for the poor chap now, so there's no rush to get to the hospital with the case. Ready? Frankie nodded. Although that she felt anything but ready, she hadn't for one moment thought they were going to collect a dead body. She'd never seen one before. All sorts of scenarios had run through her mind after the call had come in. From broken bones to a woman in labour, but not this. But then, why not? It was all part of what an ambulance crew had to deal with, she reminded herself as she got out of the ambulance and went around to the back where Winnie had already opened the doors. All set? Winnie took hold of one end of the stretcher. Yes, ready when you are. Becky did her best to smile and look calm, but her heart was racing inside her. This might be her first time, but she would be fine, she told herself as they walked towards the policeman. As they put the stretcher down and she took off the folded blankets and laid them to the side. But the moment the policeman removed the cover shrouding the young man, Frankie's resolve crumbled. The sight of the body screwing on the iron railings, with a spreading pool of dark red blood concealing on the pavement underneath, shook her to her core. She suddenly started to shake. As try as she might, she couldn't stop. She bit down on the bottom lip and tried to ignore the loud sound of her own blood whooshing rapidly in her head. It's going to be a job getting him off there, the policeman said. If we lift him off slowly, we should be able to ease him off the spikes. He shook he took hold of the young man's shoulders, while the other policeman held his legs. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Winnie glanced at Frankie as the two policemen began to struggle with the body, which clearly wasn't going to come off as smoothly as they thought. Frankie, are you all right? You've gone very pale. Frankie swallowed hard. I've not seen a dead. Winnie swiftly took her arm and spun around so that they faced the other way. Go and sit in the ambulance, and we'll deal with this. It won't take long. But I absolutely insist, Winnie said firmly. Off you go. Frankie nodded her thanks and fled back to the safety of the ambulance, where she sat looking down at her hands, her knuckles standing out in the pale pink blur through her tears. She dared not glance up to watch Winnie and the policemen removing the body, because she was scared of what might happen if she did. An odd mixture of relief, anger, and disappointment was flooding through her. This was her first job, and she'd failed miserably. What use was an ambulance driver who couldn't cope with the sight of a dead body? It was only a few short minutes before the back door of the ambulance slammed shut and Winnie climbed into the driver's seat beside her. How are you? She asked kindly. I'm sorry, Frankie began. Winnie laid a hand on her arm. No need to be sorry. You've had a nasty shock, Frankie. It happens to us all. I've known people keel over in a faint or be sick at the first time. And you can't do either of those. You'll get used to it. But what if I don't? I know you will. You won't give up easily. I have every confidence in you. The first one is always the hardest, and you've just had one of the worst first ones I've seen. Extremely nasty and awkward. I can assure you that most of our work's not as bad as that. I've done all the first aid training, but I ain't seen nothing like that poor man. Frankie shuddered. What an horrible way to die. It would have been quick, if that's any consolation, when he started the engine. Let's get him to the mortuary and they'll tidy him up. Will you tell Station Officer Steele? Frankie asked, fearing what would happen when she found out. She could imagine the stern woman taking the news of such feeble behaviour well. Winnie looked at her and smiled. Of course not. Remember, we don't always tell her what goes on, only what she needs to know. It's for her own good, and especially ours. She knew about you squirted me with a stirrup pump, Frankie reminded her. I know, but I suspect she saw that from upstairs. She likes to keep an eye on things and watches out of the window. It was just bad luck she saw me. Winnie checked her mirror and then pulled out into the road. But fear not, she wasn't here to see what happened, so she'll never know, will she? You survived your first day at Station 75 then, Bella said. Just about, Frankie said. She and Bella were walking down the street together after their shift had ended, and they waved Winnie off on a bicycle in the opposite direction. We're not that bad to work with, are we? No, you've been very kind and welcoming. Everyone at Station 75 was fine. Frankie, though, the problem was her. She couldn't shake off the worry that she wasn't up to doing the job, so she desperately wanted to do it. Winnie had kept her word and not told anyone back at the station what had happened on the call-out, so no one else knew that she'd failed. But what good was an ambulance driver who turned into a terrible wreck at the sight of a dead body? But what? Bella asked gently. I'd a problem at the incident. Frankie blurted out. Winnie had to help me out. What happened? I couldn't do it. Frankie's voice wobbled. Bella put a hand on her arm and steered her over to the side of the pavement, out of the way of other people. Listen, you were sent to the worst first incident I've ever heard of. Out of the way of other people. Listen, you were sent to the worst first incident I've ever heard of. But the sight of the body, I just turned to jelly and Winnie made me go and sit in the ambulance while she dealt with it, Frankie confessed, her eyes stinging with fears. as completely useless. You'd have to be made of stone not to be upset by what you saw, especially as it was the first time you'd seen a dead body. Bella patted Frankie's arm. I would probably have been sick on the spot if I hadn't on my first call out. Frankie shrugged. Winnie said she ain't going to tell anyone and that I'll be all right next time. And she's right, and it's no one else's business what happened. As long as the poor man was taken to the mortuary, that's all that matters. Bella smiled, her brown eyes warm and kind. We look out for each other at Station 75. Help each other out when things are hard. And you had a nasty start, Frankie, but I promise you not all incidents are like that one. Frankie nodded and managed a smile. I hope so. Otherwise, I'll be back sewing uniforms for the rest of the war. I'm sure that won't happen. Bella put her arm through Frankie's and they started to walk again. I hope you're right, and thanks for lending me these clothes today. I'll make sure they're washed and bring them back to you. Mind getting dirty. This isn't the cleanest of jobs, Bella. Dungarees are perfect for working on the ambulances. Comfy and tough, and don't worry if they get messed up. You should buy yourself some. I'll make some, Frankie says. I've got my grandmother's Singer sewing machine. Shouldn't take me long. I've had plenty of practice working at the factory. She knew far more about making clothes than she did about driving an ambulance. So if the worst did happen and she found herself thrown out of the ambulance service, at least she'd be able to get another job sewing in one of the many East End garment factories. The thought should have cheered her up, but it didn't, because in her heart she didn't want that to happen. She wanted to stay in the ambulance service. It was up to her to prove that she could do it. How'd you get on today? Josie from number 5 called out to Frankie as she turned into Matlock Street. Josie was standing on her chair, cleaning her front window, her meaty arms moving furiously to remove any streaks of dirt that dared sully her crisscross taped glass. I heard you was starting your new job. Fine, I went out on a call. Frankie kept walking, resting the urge to be polite and stop to chat as she normally would, because she would give Josie the chance to probe her with more questions, and she couldn't risk revealing any hint of what had happened. Anyone in the street knew that she was starting at Station 75 today. It would have spread up and down amongst the neighbours, because instantly everyone knew each other's business, the good and the bad. Frankie didn't want anyone to know how she'd failed miserably on the first day, despite both Winnie and Bella's reassurance. A great heavy cloud of doubt still hung over her, and all she could do was desperately hope that she'd be better prepared for future incidents, whatever they might be. If not, she didn't want to think about what would happen if she didn't do the job. They don't hang around before putting you to work. I know where to come now if I need medical help. Josie called after her loudly. Frankie waved back at her, knowing that she meant well, and kept walking towards the far end of the cobbled street, where she could see a game of cricket being played between the 2 rows of terraced houses. It was good to see the children enjoying themselves, filling the street with the sound of fun and laughter. She missed them. During the quiet weeks and months after many of them had been evacuated at the start of the war, but when none of the feared bombing had materialized, support gradually trickled home again. They'd piled up gas mask baskets to make the wickets, and Frankie recognized the familiar fair-haired figure standing in front of one of them, his bat poised for action. He looked up and saw her just as the ball was bowled towards him, but instead of hitting it, he dodged out of the way and raced towards her. Stella, you're back! I've been looking out for you. Did you drive an ambulance? Frankie smiled at 10-year-old Stanley, who, since coming to live with her and her grandparents after his mother's death 4 years ago, had become like a brother to her. Not today, though. I did go out in one. I got to practice driving them for a bit first before they let me out in one all by myself. Stanley, are you playing or what? One of the other children shouted. Go on, finish your game, and I'll tell you all about it later on, Frankie says, squeezing his shoulder. Promise? Cuss me hot, eared. Frankie made a cross sign over her chest. Stanley grinned and ran back to take up his place by the wicket again. Frankie stood and watched the game for a few minutes, glad to see how happy and relaxed he was now, so different from the child she and her grandmother had fetched home last autumn. Stanley had been one of the unlucky ones, evacuated to stay with an older couple who had no desire to have a child in their home, only the billet money that came with him. They'd made poor Stanley's life a misery, and it had been several months before Frankie and her grandmother found out what was going on. They'd gone straight there to fetch him home again. Home was where Frankie could watch over him, care for him, and make sure that no one else hurt him. She couldn't put it off any longer. She took a deep breath and walked the last few paces to number 25 Matlock Street, the house she'd lived in all her life, but which over the past year had grown to feel more like a battle zone than a house. It wasn't the house that had changed just one person in it. Ivy might officially have been her step grandmother, but the woman didn't possess a single caring bone in her body, nothing to make her deserve that title. So Frankie always called her by her name. It was an appropriate one, just like the plant, Ivy, had found herself a good home and was clinging on tightly to keep it. Closing the front door quietly behind her, Frankie walked down the hall towards the kitchen. At the back of the house, a room that had always been the beating heart of their home, full of warmth and laughter, that smells delicious cooking and her grandmother's love. She stopped, blinking away sudden tears. If her beloved grandmother had been there, Frankie would have been able to talk to her about today, to tell her the truth about what had happened, but she'd have understood and known how to help her. But Gran was gone, taken too soon by a heart attack, and replaced by a two-faced impostor who'd wormed her way into their home, pretending she was something she wasn't and changed it for the worse. She took a deep breath, mentally bracing herself for what was to come as she stepped through the doorway and saw Ivy lounging in her usual armchair, her feet up, an empty cup by her side, and picture post open on her lap. Workers' playtime blaring out of the wireless set. Gord, you make me jump. What you doing creeping about like that? Ivy snapped, her voice gravely from all the cigarettes she smoked. I wasn't creeping. Frankie walked over to the table and felt the teapot. It was stone cold. You can make me another cup while you're at it. And I ain't had time to do no tea for tonight either, so if you want something. Frankie sighed as she lit the gas and put the kettle on to boil, watching the flames lick around the bottom of it. This was nothing new. Ivy was the laziest woman she knew, and if it wasn't for Frankie, the family would often have gone hungry, or had to eat fish and chips, or go to the pie and mash up night after night. Even on top of working long hours and sewing at the factory, she'd usually been the one to cook a meal when she got home. It hadn't been like that to start with. When Ivy had first wheeled her way into the family, not long after Frankie's grandmother had died, she'd been kind and neighborly, doing everything she could to help them, charming Grandad with her cooking and by taking care of Stanley. Barely a respectable year after Grandad died, Ivy had her claws sunk so deeply into Grandad that he'd married her. It was It was a surprising match. She was 15 years his junior, a Pernadox blonde with scarlet lips, with a complete contrast to Frankie's grandmother. But she seemed to make Grandad happy again, and it looked like being the perfect arrangement. A wife for him and a mother figure for Stanley. For the first few months she had kept up the act, looking after the house, cooking and caring for Stanley, but then the mask had started to slip. There's a bit of a rabbit I got from the butcher's. You could cook that, she said now. Killed my feet queuing for that, it did. Frankie knew all about how Ivy queued for food. She sent Stanley to wait and left him standing there until she came swarming in at the end to do the actual buying. She never stood for hours waiting for anything herself. Dig up some carrots and spuds from the garden, and it'll make nice stew, Ivy added. Your grandfather will be angry after his shift, and Stanley's been out playing all day. Didn't even come in for his dinner. Frankie closed his eyes. Ivy was no fool. She knew Frankie wouldn't let Stanley and her grandfather go hungry. The kettle whistled. Frankie turned off the gas and poured the hot water onto the already used tea leaves, laying damply in the bottom of the pot, peeking out every last drop of flavour from them before they used fresh ones. So do you drive an ambulance then? Ivy asked. No, I've got to practice first. They're different to cars. Ivy laughed cruelly. So even after all that training you've done, you ain't a proper driver yet. Serves you right for getting so high and mighty and above yourself, going off and leaving a perfectly good job at the factory, she sniffed. It was good enough for me when I worked there. Course, I had to leave when Reg and I married so I could devote myself to being a proper wife and looking after him. She patted her hair and puffed out her ample chest. He didn't want me to work. He believes a wife's place is in the home, but you, she sneered, an ugly look on her face, you think you're better than anyone else getting fancy ideas about driving. Who do you think you are? Her eyes suddenly narrowed. There's something different. What on earth are you wearing them for? She pointed to Bella's dungarees. Where do they come from? I borrowed them. They're better to work in. Frankie wasn't going to tell her the real reason, or Ivy would twist it and use it against her. I'm going to make myself a pair. Ivy laughed, the throaty sound cruel and mocking. Well, you ain't going to win no fashion parade in them, that's for sure. You look a right drab mess. Ignoring the woman's taunts, Frankie went into the scullery and out through the back door into the garden, her hands bunched into fists at her sides. She knew what Ivy was up to. She was trying to goad her into an argument, throwing out her nasty barbed comments to start another row. But as much as Frankie wanted to fight back, she wasn't going to do this time. She knew that Ivy wanted her gone. It was fair. It was as if she viewed her step-granddaughter as a rival and was trying her hardest to get Frankie to leave home. But Frankie was going nowhere, not while she had her grandfather and Stanley to look out for. She needed to stay to protect them. She feared that Ivy might already have turned her malice towards them. She couldn't be sure, as she wasn't there to watch over them all the time. But certainly her grandfather didn't seem the same happy man he was when he'd married Ivy. Unless Frankie witnessed Ivy's vindictiveness herself, she wouldn't know what was going on, because the woman chose her moments and hid her behaviors from those she didn't want to see it. Frankie found the garden fork and set about digging up some potatoes and carrots. Grandad had turned most of the garden into a vegetable plot, fitting in as much as he could, even sowing lettuces in the soil covering the Edison shelter. Everything he grew helped to eke out their mild green rations, along with the eggs they got from the 6 hens they kept in a run at the bottom of the garden. Carefully pushing the fork into the soil, she pressed down on it with her foot and loosened the clots, unearthing pale potatoes that she gathered up into a basket. She was brushing the soil off some carrots when she heard the back door open behind her. She spun round, exposing another barrage of comments from Ivy, but it was her grandfather who appeared. Ivy said you were out here. How'd you get on? He strode over to her, looking smart and tall in his police uniform. Good, Frankie put the carrots in the basket. Once I've got some practice driving an ambulance, I'll be allowed out myself. Granddad nodded and smiled at her, his blue eyes kind. You'll soon get the hang of it. Shouldn't you be on the beat? I was just pressing and couldn't resist dropping in to see if you were home. He reached out and patted her shoulder. I'm proud of you, and I know your father would have been too if he were here to see it. He'd always had a fancy to learn to drive one day. He paused and sighed, only he never got the chance in the end. The unexpected mention of her father surprised Frankie. Her grandparents had never talked about him much, so she'd always loved it when, from time to time, they'd let something slip out, and she'd learned little snippets about him that she squirreled away in her memory to treasure. Her father had been killed in the final months of the Great War, before Frankie was born, and all she had of him was a photograph and a few memories gleaned from her grandparents. She understood why they hadn't talked about him much. The Great War had dealt them a cruel blow, taking not only their father but both of his brothers, too. Now she grabbed the chance to ask more. What about my mother? Did she want to learn to drive? Grandad shrugged. I don't know. Frankie knew hardly anything about her mother. She died in the Spanish flu epidemic when Frankie had been just a few months old, and her grandparents had taken her in and brought her up. Her mother hadn't come from around here and had no family of her own, so there hadn't been anyone left to ask about her. She would always remain a mystery to Frankie, just a face in a photograph beside her husband. When he loved riding her bicycle home through the streets of London after she finished her shifts at Station 75, delighted in taking different routes through the city and passing by magnificent buildings like St. Paul's on her way. Reaching her godmother's house in Bedfordshire Place, Bloomsbury, she carried her bicycle down the steps to the basement and went inside, planning a long soak in the bath to make the most of those precious 5 inches of hot water before spending a pleasant evening with Connie. Oh, Winnie, you're back, Connie said, emerging from the sitting room just as Winnie was about to go upstairs. There's a telephone message for you from your mother. Winnie's happy mood instantly evaporated. The news that her mother had telephoned could only mean something was required of her. She turned to face her godmother, trying hard to paint a neutral expression on her face. What did she say? She expects you to join her for supper at the Donchester at 7:30. Expects? Winnie thought. That summoned her mother up perfectly. She never asked or invited, just issued her commands and expected everyone else to jump to it and comply with them. Connie's blue eyes met Winnie's and she smiled sympathetically. That's what she said. Thank you. Winnie turned and shrugged up the stairs, her lightness and happiness of a few moments ago replaced by a heavy dread of the evening ahead. A soak in a hot tub would be like harboring in a calm port before going out to face the stormy evening ahead. Winnie was early. She waited outside the Dorchester, not wanting to go in before she absolutely had to, but not daring to be late. Her tidiness was her mother's pet hate. Whatever the reason for the summons this evening, she didn't want to taint the occasion with lateness before it had even begun. At precisely 25 minutes past 7, she entered the restaurant and was guided to the table where her mother was already sitting. dressed in a pre-war dove grey suit, her hat perfectly positioned on her immaculately styled ash blonde hair, her back poker straight as her cast her icy blue gaze around at her fellow diners. Ah, there you are, Margaret. She glanced at her watch, to satisfy herself that she ain't being kept waiting. The use of her first name startled Winnie. She was not so used to going by her nickname. She was now so used to going by her nickname, which even Connie had loved and quickly adopted, that she wondered for a moment who her mother was talking to. But the superior tone quickly filtered down into her subconsciousness, stirring countless memories of other times when her name had been uttered with an air of expostulation or disappointment. Hello, mother. She bent down and lightly kissed the prolific powdered cheek. The smell of Chanel number 5 instantly taking her back to having to do the same thing as a child at the end of each evening's brief visit to her parents, after which she'd been whisked away to bed by Sita, her nursemaid, so that her mother could resume her life without her responsibility of personally caring for her children. Those few minutes had been Winnie's least favourite part of the day. She was relieved to be distracted from the memory by the mantra D pulling me chair out for her to sit down. She smiled at him, and he bowed his head before leaving to deal with other diners. I didn't know you were coming up to London, she said once they were alone. I had a meeting this afternoon and thought I'd stay over and have supper with my only daughter. Her mother paused briefly, smoothing imaginary creases out of her immaculate fine wool shirt. Tell me, how is your work? Winnie was instantly suspicious. Her mother never normally wanted to know anything about her job. As far as she and Winnie's father were concerned, she was merely playing at being an ambulance driver. It wasn't serious work worthy of her time. They'd done everything they could to discourage her from joining the ambulance service, ignoring the fact that at 22 years old she was legally responsible for herself and knew what she wanted to do. It had only been Connie's intervention that finally put a halt to their opposition, at least for the time being. It was going wonderfully well. The station's superbly organized and we're doing a good, useful job. But you can't be utterly busy. There hasn't been any of the expected bombing, with hundreds of casualties to deal with, her mother said smoothly. As you expected there to be, as I recall. Winnie was stunned by her mother quoting the actual words that she'd used herself in her battle to convince her parents that becoming an ambulance driver was a worthwhile contribution to the war effort. She gave herself a mental shake. She shouldn't have expected anything less. Her mother had an annoyingly ability to store away information ready to bring out and use to her advantage at a later date. Despite what her parents thought, Winnie was proud of what she did. It wasn't always easy, and she prided herself on doing a good job. Indeed, we haven't had bombing casualties yet, but all that could change any day, according to the whims of Herr Hitler. If and when it happens, we're prepared for it. In the meantime, we're being kept busy doing general work, taking patients to hospital, hoping that would satisfy her mother. And when he changed the subject, how's father? He's well. Terribly busy, of course, at the War Office. We all have to do our bit. I've been asked to chair another committee. One doesn't like to say no, as it would set a bad example. Though goodness knows where I shall find the time, of course. Her mother stopped, and her face switched to a surprised expression, closely followed by a welcoming smile as she looked past Winnie's shoulder. Why, it's Charles. What a lovely coincidence. Winnie turned round and her heart plummeted at the sight of Charles Hume striding towards them, grinning all over his shiny round face. What was he doing here? What were the chances of him being in the same place at the same time as her and her mother? She'd been set up, she realized. This was what this supper was really all about. Her mother putting Winnie once again in an awkward situation with a man she loathed. Could she never give up and accept that her daughter was where she wanted to be, doing what she loved? A marriage to the dull, pompous Charles Hume would never ever happen. Charles, how lovely to see you, Winnie's mother fluttered ridiculously, like a schoolgirl with a crush, laughing as Charles kissed her hand. Are you dining alone? Alas, yes. He shook a look at Winnie as she had to do her best not to physically squirm when he took her hand in his sweaty palm. Margaret, you look as charmingly divine as ever. Charles, Winnie nodded at him. It took all her willpower not to snatch her hand back and wipe it clean with her napkin. Well, we can't have that. I'll have them set another place, and you must join us. I simply wouldn't bear otherwise. Winnie's mother waved her over and issued her command for another place to be laid and a chair brought. Taking a deep breath, Winnie braced herself for a thunderous evening ahead. All she wanted to do was tell them that tell them what she really thought and get out of there as fast as possible. But she'd been brought up to behave impeccably in polite society, and so would have to waste her evening tolerating an ambitious man whom her parents thought the perfect match for her. It showed how little they knew or understood her. I wondered how soon you'd be able to get away, Connie's voice called from the sitting room after Winnie had let herself in the front door. Come and have a drink. I dare say you could do with one. Flung herself down on the sofa, sighing loudly as Connie poured her a small glass of brandy from her emergency supply. Thank you, she smiled gratefully as she took her glass. Sipping the amber liquid, she leaned back against the sofa and enjoyed the warmth the brandy spread within her as it went down. Was it awful? Connie asked, sitting down beside her. Yes, it was a set-up worth that pompous food Charles Hume. Mother pretended it was a happy coincidence that he was dining alone in the same place and at the same time as us, and we simply had to invite him to join us. I spent the whole evening feuding off a two-pronged attack, with them trying to convince me that I should leave the ambulance service and become a Wen, or eternally supply give in to the inevitable and marry Charles as both his and his my parents' wish. She threw the last of the brandy down in one gulp. Are you going to? Connie asked, her mouth twitching with suppressed laughter. Of course not. That way madness lies. Good. That's exactly what I would expect of my darling goddaughter. Connie took Winnie's hand and squeezed it, her blue eyes smiling gently. You and I are cut from the same cloth. We're individuals who do what we want to do and will not bow down to their natural family pressures. Look where we got Look where that got you, Winnie giggled. Connie threw back her head and laughed, making her blonde bob swing wildly about her face. Precisely, and I don't have to have it any other way. Winnie sighed. I just wish my mother could respect that I have opinions of my own and accept the choices I have in my life. And and I'm a grown woman and I know what I do and don't want. And that doesn't include the delightful Charles. Never! Bella was used to sleeping in attics. This attic room was by far the nicest I've ever had. Painted a cheerful primrose yellow with a colourful patchwork cover on the bed. A waiststand, a chest of drawers with a mirror on top, a bookcase, a little table and chair underneath the window. She especially loved it because it had been chosen by her, and wasn't merely where she slept because the room went with her job. Those rooms always had the most basic Margrim furnishings and were a harsh contrast with the lavish ones in which her employees slept. Unlike those others before, this attic room was her own. She didn't have to share it with anyone, and that was bliss. Sitting at the little table under the window, Bella was reading one of the books she had borrowed from the public library on her way home from that afternoon. A gentle tapping on the door pulled her out of the book, and she left it open on the table and went to see who was there. "I brought you a hot drink, dear Miss Taylor. Miss Taylor, her landlady, held out a steaming mug of cocoa. "Thought you might like one before you turn in for the night." "Thank you." Bella took the mug from her. "It's very kind of you. You spoil us lodgers." There were two other girls living in the house. They both worked night shifts in the new mattress factory, so Bella didn't see much of them. Mrs. Taylor swatted away the idea with her hand. "Nonsense! I love looking after you girls. I think of uh, I think of it as my contribution to the war effort." She smiled, her brown eyes crinkling at the corners. "Are you on early shift again tomorrow?" "Yes, starting at 7:30, but we'll be rotating shifts again soon. Then I won't start till 3:30 in the afternoon and finish at 11:30 at night. Make sure you let me know when you do so I can have your food out for you. Good night then." "Good night, Bella. Good night." Bella smiled to herself as she closed the door. She'd been so lucky to find a landlady like Miss Taylor, who was more like a mother than her and the other girls. Until she came to live here, it had been a long time since anyone had looked after her. Sitting back down at the table, she picked up her book again and started to read, soaking in the words and learning as much as she would to prepare herself for the future, because the war wouldn't last forever, and when it was over, she was determined that she wasn't going back to what she had been before. Bella woke with a start. The eerie wail of the air raid siren had broken into her beautiful dream. She had been at home, her real home, with her father, mother, and brother, and she felt so happy. She wanted to hold on to that feeling, enjoy it for a few more precious moments, but it was quickly snuffed out by the surge of adrenaline that started to course through her as the mournful sound continued to rise and fall. Through Throwing back the covers, she felt for her clothes in the darkness and pulled them on, then hurried over to the window and carefully pulled the blackout curtain open and crack and peered outside. She could see the beams of searchlights probing the night for enemy planes. They looked strangely lovely as they wove hyperbolically to and fro in the pitch black sky over Bethnal Green. She wanted to stop and stare, but she mustn't, so she dropped the curtain and grabbed her small torch from the chest of drawers, using it to light her way down the stairs to the first floor landing. "Oh, Bella, thank goodness." Miss Taylor stood waiting for her, dressed in her coat, her handbag in her hands, and her grey hair in curlers. "Come on, we need to get to the cupboard." Bella took hold of the older woman's elbow and gently guided her towards the stairs. "Do you think we're going to be bombed?" Miss Taylor asked in a shaky voice as they made their way down. "It would be another false alarm, but it's best to take cover." Bella opened the understairs cupboard door and ushered Miss Taylor inside, where she slumped down on the chair they'd managed to squeeze inside for her because her arthritic knees wouldn't put up with sitting on cushions on the floor like her young lodgers. Bella followed her in and closed the door. All we need to do is light the candle and we'll be as right as rain. She propped her torch up on the shelf where they'd left a candle and matches in readiness. She struck a match and the flare of light lit up the confined space, casting their shadows on the walls and highlighting the looping strands of cobwebs high up under the top stairs. There we are. Satisfied that the candle was alight, she blew out the match and settled down on a cushion. We're as snug as bugs in a rug in here. What time is it? Miss Taylor asked. Bella looked at her watch. 3:05. And you're due at work at 7:30. What if this is still going on then? You can't go out in it, Miss Taylor fretted. I'm sure it'll all be over long before then. It's probably a false alarm, and the only damage done will be to your sleep. And my nerves, Miss Taylor sighed. I'm glad you're here. I'd hate to be in here on my own. Bella reached up and patted the older woman's gold, veiny hand. Her landlady, normally such a cheerful, happy woman, it was awful to see her so on edge and afraid. We'll be all right, just... She broke off as the sickening noise of a muffled crump, closely followed by another and another, shattered the peace of their sheltered cocoon. They've come, Miss Taylor shrieked, clutching Bella's hand in both of hers, and squeezing it tight. They're bombing us. We're safe in here, Bella said, trying to reassure herself as much as her landlady. Because if a bomb fell directly on them, would they stand a chance in that little space under the stairs? Until now, they hadn't had to rely on it for their safety, because London hadn't been bombed. All they could do was sit tight and hope for the best. And that is that. Of this book. And I'm not going to read any more because I thought it's done. Fucking kill. Yeah, no. And Grace is online. So hi, Grace. Well, was online. So yeah. I'm going to come off now. Because there's my back door that's open, so I need to close that. Because I'm fucking freezing. And then I'm going to have my dinner. A very extremely late dinner, but dinner nonetheless. So yeah. Latest people.